Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The Galactic Combat Academy hung in the void like a steel flower, its petals made of training rings and observation decks, all rotating gently around a central hub that housed more weapons than most planetary defense grids. It was, as recruitment posters loved to remind potential cadets, the premier institution for military excellence in the known galaxy. Which was a fancy way of saying, if you wanted to learn how to break things and people professionally, this was the place to do it. And on this particular morning, in Training Ring 12, a colossal mistake was about to unfold. Gina stood at the center of the mat, rolling her shoulders and trying to ignore the growing crowd of onlookers. She was human, which meant she looked disappointingly mundane compared to the assembled alien species watching from the observation rails. No chitinous armor, no extra limbs, no natural weapons to speak of. Just a woman in her mid-20s wearing the Academy's standard gray training suit, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her expression suggesting she'd rather be literally anywhere else. She'd been demonstrating a basic grappling technique to a group of Talarian cadets. Bipedal mammals, with reflexes that made cats look sluggish when the interruption came. The laughter started first. Deep, resonating, the kind that vibrated through your chest cavity whether you wanted it to or not. Then came the voice, booming across the training ring with all the subtlety of a meteor strike. This is what Earth sends to teach combat? The words dripped with amusement and something darker, something that tasted like contempt. I have seen hatchlings with more threatening presence. Gina closed her eyes for just a moment, took a breath that suggested she was counting to 10 in several languages, and turned around. Rothmal stood at the entrance to the training ring, and, look, calling him impressive was like calling a supernova slightly warm. He was Chirathi, which meant he stood nearly 9 feet tall on 4 legs that looked like they could kick through a bulkhead without trying. His upper torso was humanoid, sort of, if humans were carved from obsidian and covered in natural plating that had turned aside plasma fire on at least 3 documented occasions. His head was insectoid, compound eyes glittering with that particular shade of malicious glee that transcended species, and mandibles that clicked together in what passed for Chirathi laughter. He wore the crimson and gold of a commander's rank, which meant he'd earned his position through a combination of skill, ruthlessness, and probably standing on a pile of his competitor's broken pride. The Chirathi didn't do participation trophies. Commander Rothmal, Gina said, her voice flat, professional, the tone of someone who had dealt with this exact brand of nonsense more times than she cared to count. Can I help you? Or are you just here for the sparkling personality showcase? The Talarian cadets, bless them, made that chittering sound that passed for nervous laughter in their species. Several other alien instructors had paused their own training sessions, sensing drama the way sharks sense blood in water. Rothmal clicked his mandibles again, stepping fully into the ring with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight he cared about. I am here because I was told humans now instruct combat courses at this academy. I wanted to see this curiosity for myself. He gestured at Gina with one of his 4 arms, the movement dismissive. Earth, the diplomatic species, the peaceful negotiators, the soft ones who talk their way out of conflicts. He leaned down, his massive frame casting her in shadow. And they send you to teach warriors how to fight? The crowd around the observation rails had grown. Word traveled fast on the academy, especially when it smelled like someone was about to get humiliated. Gina could see at least 50 cadets now, representing a dozen species, all watching with varying degrees of anticipation and second-hand embarrassment. She looked up at Rothmal, her expression unchanged, and said, "You done?" His compound eyes somehow managed to convey surprise. "You are not offended?" "Oh, I'm offended," Gina replied, stretching her neck to one side until it popped. "I'm just wondering if you're actually going somewhere with this, or if you woke up this morning and decided today was the day you'd demonstrate what an ass sounds like in Chirathi." The crowd made various sounds of shock and amusement. You didn't talk to a Chirathi commander like that. Their species had a thing about honor and respect, and a whole bunch of cultural rules that basically boiled down to, don't embarrass them publicly, or they'd challenge you to ritual combat. Which, as it turned out, was exactly what Rothmel did. "You dare!" His mandibles spread wide, and if you didn't know better, you'd think he was genuinely angry. But Gina had been on the academy long enough to recognize theater when she saw it. He'd come here for this. The insults were just foreplay. "I challenge you, human, right here, right now. Show me what Earth taught you about combat. Show me why you deserve to stand in this ring and call yourself an instructor." Gina stared at him for a long moment, her expression suggesting she was doing complex mathematics in her head, calculations that involved measuring exactly how much paperwork this was going to generate versus how satisfying it would be to wipe that smugness off his face. The narrator of this story, if such a thing could exist in real time, would like to point out that this is the moment. This exact second. This is when Rothmal made a decision that he would regret for the rest of his very long life. Because Gina wasn't just any human. She wasn't just any combat instructor. She was the human who'd survived the Battle of Proxima Station with nothing but a broken rifle and what Earth military files politely called creative problem-solving. She was the instructor who'd been specifically requested by the Academy Board after 3 different alien species filed reports describing human combat doctrine as psychologically distressing and possibly war crimes, unclear on definitions. But Rothmal didn't know any of that. He just saw a small, soft human who probably couldn't even break his armor plating. Gina smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the kind of smile that apex predators wore right before they reminded you why they were apex. "Okay," she said simply. "Non-lethal, obviously. But no holds barred otherwise. You good with that?" Rothmal clicked his mandibles in agreement, clearly delighted. "Acceptable. I promise to be gentle, little human. I would hate to damage my academy's newest instructor." The pause before the last word made it clear what he thought of her qualifications. "How kind," Gina replied, moving to the center of the mat. "You want a countdown? Or should we just go?" "I need no ceremony to handle a human," Rothmal said, following her. His forelegs moved with surprising grace for something that size, and he settled into a combat stance that spoke of decades of training. The crowd leaned forward as one organism, anticipation thick enough to cut with a plasma blade. Gina stood loose, relaxed, her hands at her sides. "Your move, Commander." And so, with the confidence of someone who'd never actually read a human combat doctrine file, Rothmal attacked. He was fast, terrifyingly so for something his size. His upper arms lashed out in a combination strike that would have pulverized ribs if it connected, while his lower arms positioned for a grab that would have immobilized most species. His legs shifted, ready to sweep or stomp depending on her reaction. It was textbook Chirathi combat, refined over thousands of generations, optimized for their physiology, and tested against every major species in the galaxy. Gina wasn't there when the strikes arrived. She'd moved, not away, but aside, her body angling just enough that Rothmal's fists cut through empty air where her torso had been a microsecond before. Her hand came up, not to strike, but to redirect, catching his lower left arm and using his own momentum to pull him slightly off balance. It wasn't much. A creature with 4 legs didn't lose balance easily. But it was enough to make him adjust, enough to interrupt the smooth flow of his combination. "Interesting opening," Gina said, her tone conversational, like they were discussing the weather and not actively trying to demonstrate violent superiority. "Very traditional. Do all Kirathi fight exactly the same, or did you specifically train to be predictable?" Rothmal's mandibles clicked in irritation, and he pressed forward with a barrage of strikes that would have overwhelmed most opponents through sheer volume. His species excelled at sustained assault, using their multiple limbs to create patterns that were nearly impossible to defend against. Gina defended against them anyway. She moved like water, like smoke, like something that refused to be in the same space as his fists. Block, redirect, evade, sometimes all 3 in combinations that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. She wasn't faster than him, not exactly. But she was moving like she knew where he'd strike before he did. Because she did. She was reading his body language, his weight distribution, the slight tells that preceded every attack. Humans were embarrassingly good at pattern recognition. It was what their brains did when they got bored, which was often. "Earth's first lesson," Gina said, ducking under a strike that would have taken her head off, "is that fair fights are for sports, not survival." She tapped his armored chest as she slipped past, not hard enough to hurt, just enough to prove she could have. "We had about 6,000 years of recorded warfare, Commander. You know what we learned?" Rothmal spun, faster than something his size had any right to, and nearly caught her with a back leg sweep. Nearly. "What did you learn, human? How to run away?" "How to win," Gina replied, and for the first time she struck back. Her strike wasn't powerful, not compared to what Rothmal could deliver, but it landed on a joint in his lower right leg, the kind of spot that armor didn't cover well because it needed flexibility. His leg buckled, just a fraction, just enough to make him shift his weight awkwardly. And that's when the audience started to realize something was wrong. Not wrong for Gina. Wrong for Rothmal. "See, here's the thing about Earth," Gina continued, circling now, making him turn to track her. "We didn't evolve with natural weapons. No claws, no fangs worth mentioning, no armor plating, no venom." She feinted left, watched his reaction, catalogued it. "We were these weird, soft primates that somehow decided we wanted to be in charge of the food chain. You know what that required?" Rothmal lunged, all 4 arms extended in a grapple attempt that should have been inescapable. Gina dropped low, rolled under him, came up behind, and delivered a sharp strike to the back of another joint. "Creativity," she finished. The Kirathi commander spun with a snarl, and, okay, now he was actually annoyed. He abandoned the formal combat style and went for raw aggression, the kind of assault that had earned his species their reputation as elite warriors. Strikes came from all angles, unpredictable, overwhelming. Gina stopped trying to be clever and started moving like someone who actually understood what danger meant. She blocked what she had to, took hits on her arms that would bruise spectacularly later, and gave ground when staying put would have been stupid. But she never stopped talking. Earth had jungles, deserts, tundras, mountains, oceans, she said, breathing hard now, but not winded, not yet. Every environment you can imagine. We lived there, adapted to it, learned to kill things in it. She caught one of his wrists, used it as a pivot, point to swing out of range of his other arms. You know what that teaches you? How to use everything around you. She proved it by redirecting his momentum toward one of the training ring's support posts. Rothmal caught himself before collision, but it cost him position, cost him tempo. And we didn't just have one culture developing combat techniques, Gina continued, and there was something in her voice now, something that suggested the casual friendliness was a mask, and it was starting to slip. We had thousands, isolated from each other, all figuring out independently how to break bodies efficiently. She demonstrated with a combination that looked like it borrowed from at least 4 different martial traditions, flowing from one to the next, without pause. Then we met each other and shared notes. Rothmal managed to catch her in a grab. Finally, his superior reach paying off. His lower arms locked around her torso, beginning to squeeze. His species could crack starship hull plating with their grip strength. A human rib cage should have been trivial. Gina didn't panic, didn't struggle, just looked up at him with those disturbingly calm eyes and said, "Earth's second lesson, we don't quit." Then she headbutted him. Not in the armored parts. Humans weren't stupid. She angled for one of his compound eyes, the kind of target that armor didn't cover, because covering it would mean blindness. It wasn't a devastating blow, but compound eyes were sensitive, and Rothmal's grip loosened just enough. Gina twisted, leveraged, and broke free using a technique that made several of the watching instructors wince in sympathy. She dropped to the mat, rolled away, and came up breathing heavier, but grinning like someone who was finally having fun. Rothmal shook his head, clearing his vision, and really looked at her for the first time. "You are more durable than expected." "Yeah, we get that a lot," Gina replied, rolling her shoulders. "Want to know the really fun part?" She started circling again, and he matched her, both of them moving like binary stars locked in orbit. Humans are persistence hunters. You know what that means? "Enlighten me," Rothmal said, his tone suggesting he was done being amused and ready to end this. "It means we didn't run fast enough to catch prey. We just followed it. For hours, for days sometimes. Just kept coming, never stopping, until it collapsed from exhaustion." She smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "We're the horror movie monster that never stops walking, Commander. You know how long I can keep this pace up." Rothmal attacked again, and this time there was urgency in it, the recognition that maybe he'd miscalculated. His combination strikes were still powerful, still fast, but now Gina was reading them like children's books. Block, evade, counter, block, evade, counter, a rhythm emerging from chaos. And she was right about the endurance thing. Rothmal was breathing harder now, his movements fractionally slower. His species were ambush predators, built for explosive power, not marathons. Gina, meanwhile, looked like she could do this until the station's reactor gave out. "Getting tired?" she asked, not even breathing that hard. "We can take a break if you need one." "I need nothing from you, human," Rothmal snapped, pride overriding tactical sense. He pressed harder, faster, pouring everything into overwhelming her through sheer aggression. Gina let him think he was finally breaking through her defense. Let him overcommit, overextend, burn through his energy reserves, chasing the knockout blow. The crowd had gone quiet now. The initial entertainment of watching a human get demolished had evaporated. Now they were watching something else, something that made several species deeply uncomfortable. They were watching a predator play with food that had suddenly revealed teeth. Rothmal landed a solid hit, finally. his upper right fist connecting with Gina's shoulder hard enough to spin her partially around. Triumph flashed across his features, mandibles spreading in victory. Gina used the spin added to it, came around with momentum behind a strike that caught him in the thorax gap between armor plates. Not hard enough to crack anything, but hard enough to hurt, to remind him that she'd been holding back. "Earth's third lesson," she said, and her voice had gone cold, professional, the tone of someone delivering a briefing on unpleasant facts, "is that we're really disturbingly good at violence." She stopped defending entirely and went on offense. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't honorable. It was brutally efficient, targeting joints and gaps and vulnerable points with surgical precision. Every strike served a purpose: destabilize, disorient, damage. She used techniques that made the audience murmur in discomfort because they recognized them as things you did to enemies you wanted to stop existing, not opponents you were sparring with. Rothmal tried to adapt, tried to counter, but she'd spent the entire fight learning his patterns while he'd learned nothing about hers. She hit him in sequences designed to create openings for follow-up strikes. She attacked from angles his anatomy made difficult to defend. She used his own armor against him, striking plates in ways that transferred shock to the body beneath. "We had weapons that could end our entire species," Gina said, driving a knee into his lower joint, forcing him down to 3 legs. "Multiple times, different kinds. We built them, aimed them at each other, and then mostly chose not to use them." She caught one of his arms, hyperextended the elbow. "But we kept them, just in case. You know what kind of species does that?" Rothmal staggered, his balance compromised, his breathing labored. "One that understands deterrence?" "One that's absolutely insane," Gina corrected. "We terrorized ourselves so effectively that we achieved peace through mutual assured annihilation. We looked at the ability to burn our world 1,000 times over and decided it was an acceptable risk if it meant winning arguments." She swept his legs, all 4 of them, using a technique that shouldn't have worked on his body structure but did because she'd spent 20 minutes studying how he distributed weight. Rothmal went down hard, armor clanging against the training mat. Gina stood over him, not gloating, just present. "And that's just our large-scale warfare. You want to hear about the small-scale stuff? The trench warfare, the urban combat, the guerrilla tactics?" She offered him a hand up, which he stared at like it might be a trick. "We spent centuries fighting each other in every conceivable environment, Commander. We got really good at it." Rothmal didn't take the hand. Instead, he rolled to his feet with more dignity than his position warranted, and reset his stance. His mandibles clicked in what might have been respect, or might have been rage, hard to tell. "You have made your point, human," he said, his voice tight. "But I am not defeated." Gina's expression softened into something almost sympathetic. "No," she agreed. "Not yet." And the really scary part? She still hadn't broken a sweat. The thing about watching someone realize they've made a catastrophic error in judgment is that it happens in stages. First comes the denial, the insistence that everything is going according to plan. Then comes the doubt, small cracks in the certainty. Then, if you're unlucky enough, comes the understanding. Rothmal was somewhere between doubt and understanding, and it showed in the way he moved now. More cautious, more defensive, like someone who'd just realized the prey he'd been chasing had circled around and become the hunter. The crowd felt it too. The observation rails were packed now, at least 200 beings from across the galaxy, watching what had started as entertainment and turned into something else entirely. Several instructors had their data pads out, recording. This would end up in training archives, probably with a warning label. Gina didn't press her advantage immediately. She circled, hands loose at her sides, and when she spoke again, her tone was almost conversational. You know what's really interesting about human combat doctrine? We don't have ritual combat. Not in our military training, anyway. Rothmal kept his compound eyes locked on her, tracking every micro-movement. All species have ritual combat. It establishes hierarchy, proves worth. Yeah, we have that for sports, Gina agreed. Competitions, tournaments, games with rules and referees and weight classes, but our actual military training? She shook her head. That's designed around one question. How do we make the other person stop being a threat as quickly as possible? She moved suddenly, not attacking but testing his reaction time. He responded, slower than before, fatigue building in his muscles. She noted it, catalogued it, and kept talking. Most species in the galaxy, she continued, developed combat as a way to establish dominance without killing each other off. Social structures built around showing who's strongest, most skilled, most worthy. Makes sense evolutionarily. Keeps the species from self-destructing over every dispute. Rothmal lunged, trying to use his reach advantage to control the engagement distance. Gina slipped inside his guard instead of retreating, too close for his longer arms to be effective, and delivered a rapid combination to his thorax before dancing away. Humans did that too, she said. For a while. Then we invented agriculture, civilization, resources worth fighting over. Suddenly it wasn't about who was strongest. It was about who survived. She paused, tilted her head. Want to guess what survival selects for? Strength, Rothmal insisted, but his voice carried uncertainty now. Ruthlessness, Gina corrected. Willingness to do whatever it takes. Humans fought wars where we killed each other by the millions. We invented weapons specifically designed to cause maximum suffering. We wrote entire philosophical treatises on the most efficient ways to destroy enemy populations. Her expression was grim. We got really, disturbingly good at ending threats permanently. She attacked again, and this time there was no playfulness in it. Her strikes targeted his damaged joints, the places she'd already compromised. She moved like someone executing a plan that had been building since the fight started, each action a setup for the next. Rothmal blocked what he could, but his defense was crumbling. His armor, designed to turn aside plasma fire and bladed weapons, meant nothing against an opponent who only struck unarmored gaps. His multiple limbs, usually an overwhelming advantage, became liabilities as she systematically damaged them one by one. Earth's fourth lesson, Gina said, her voice cutting through the sounds of impact, is that information is a weapon. She proved it by exploiting a habit in his footwork he probably didn't know he had, sweeping the leg he unconsciously favored when tired. Rothmal stumbled, caught himself, but his positioning was compromised. We had something called psychological warfare, Gina continued, pressing her advantage. Whole branches of military science dedicated to breaking enemy morale, spreading misinformation, making opponents so afraid they'd surrender without fighting. We weaponized rumors. We weaponized culture. We weaponized economics. A strike to his lower left arm's elbow joint, hard enough to numb it temporarily. We fought wars where soldiers never saw each other, just pushed buttons and erased cities from orbit. We fought wars in networks, in data streams, in the spaces between what's real and what people believe is real. Rothmal tried to reset, to create distance and recover, but Gina matched him step for step. You came here expecting ritual combat, she said. Honor, tradition, a test of skill. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Rothmal demanded, and there was something in his voice now that might have been fear. A lesson, Gina replied simply. You asked me to show you what Earth taught me. This is it. Not the techniques, not the tactics. The philosophy. She stopped moving, stood still, and for a moment looked genuinely sad. We learned that the universe doesn't care about fair. It doesn't reward honor or tradition or fighting by the rules. It rewards survival. The Academy's overseer, Norix, descended from the observation platform. They were Gentari, a species that looked like someone had crossed a mantis with smoke and given it the ability to exist in 3 dimensions at once. Their presence at ringside was unusual enough that several cadets backed away nervously. This demonstration has progressed sufficiently, Norix said, their voice resonating in harmonics that bypassed translation and hit the brain directly. Both participants have proven their points. Gina glanced at the overseer, then back at Rothmal. You want to stop? The Chirathi commander's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of inner conflict. Pride warred with pragmatism, and for a long moment it was unclear which would win. Then he straightened as much as his damaged posture allowed and said, No. The human claims to show me what Earth taught. I would see the lesson completed. Norix's form rippled with what might have been concern. Commander, perhaps... I challenged her, Rothmal interrupted. I will see it through. Gina looked at him for a long moment, and something complicated crossed her face. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Okay, she said quietly. But Commander, you need to understand something. Everything so far, I've been holding back. The crowd murmured. Rothmal's compound eyes widened fractionally. You claim to have been restraining yourself? I've been demonstrating, Gina corrected. Showing you techniques, explaining concepts, letting you see the theory behind the practice. You wanted to know what Earth taught me. She rolled her shoulders, and when she settled into her stance again, something had changed. Her casual demeanor evaporated like mist under harsh light. This is what Earth taught me. What happened next was not a fight. It was a dismantling. Gina moved with speed she hadn't shown before, not flashy or exaggerated, just efficient. She got inside Rothmal's guard and stayed there, too close for his larger frame to be effective. Every strike served multiple purposes: damage, positioning, set up for the next attack. She targeted nerves, joints, pressure points that most species didn't even know they had. Rothmal tried to grapple, to use his superior mass and strength to overwhelm her. Gina used his momentum against him, techniques that looked simple but required intimate understanding of physics and body mechanics. She made him carry his own weight in directions his anatomy wasn't designed for. We had a saying on Earth, she said, her voice, clinical now, detached. There are old warriors and bold warriors, but no old, bold warriors. She hyperextended his upper right arm at the shoulder, not enough to dislocate, but enough to send pain signals screaming. Survival requires knowing when you're outmatched. Rothmal snarled, tried to sweep her with his back legs. She jumped the sweep, came down with her knee on his lower spine where armor plates met, and the Chirathi commander's legs buckled involuntarily. We trained our soldiers to fight wounded, exhausted, outnumbered, Gina continued, because wars don't wait for you to be at peak condition. They happen when you're tired, scared, and everything hurts. She caught his mandible, not enough to break, but enough to control his head positioning, a deeply unsettling violation in Chirathi culture. And we taught them that winning wasn't about being strongest or fastest or best. It was about being the one still standing when everything else failed. She released him, stepped back, and Rothmal collapsed to 3 legs, breathing hard, ichor leaking from gaps in his armor. He wasn't critically injured, nothing that wouldn't heal, but his pride was shattered and everyone watching knew it. "Yield," Gina said. Not a question, not a request. A statement of fact. Rothmal tried to stand, got halfway up, and his damaged joints betrayed him. He went back down, and this time he stayed there. His mandibles clicked in a pattern that every Kirathi in the audience recognized. Formal surrender. The training ring was silent. 200 beings from across the galaxy watched a human woman standing over a Kirathi commander, and for the first time, many of them understood why humanity's military files were classified at the highest levels. Gina offered her hand again. This time, after a moment's hesitation, Rothmal took it. She helped him to his feet, steadied him when his legs threatened to give out, and said quietly enough that only he could hear, "You fought well. Better than you think." "I was destroyed," Rothmal said, his voice bitter. "You lasted 20 minutes against someone trained to end fights in 20 seconds, Gina replied. "That's not nothing, Commander." Norix approached, their form shifting colors in patterns that suggested deep thought. "The human combat instructor has proven her qualifications extensively," they said. "Commander Rothmal, you require medical attention." "I require answers," Rothmal said, looking at Gina. "You fight unlike any opponent I have faced. Your species has been in the galactic community for barely 3 generations. How do you have such refined combat doctrine?" Gina's expression went distant. "Because we've been fighting each other for thousands of generations before we even left our planet. We had to learn fast, or we wouldn't have survived ourselves." "That is—" Norix paused, searching for words. "Troubling information." "Yeah," Gina agreed. "It troubles us too. Why do you think we're so big on diplomacy now?" The medical team arrived with equipment designed to handle Kirathi physiology, which was fortunate because Rothmal looked like he'd been through a ship collision rather than a sparring match. They swarmed around him with scanners and regenerative gel, muttering in their own language about stressed joints and microfractures in his armor plating. Gina stood off to the side, watching them work, and for the first time since the fight started, she looked tired. Not physically exhausted, that would come later when the adrenaline wore off, but mentally drained in the way that comes from doing something you're good at, but don't particularly enjoy. The crowd was dispersing slowly, reluctantly, like people leaving a concert who weren't quite ready for it to be over. Conversations bubbled up in a dozen languages, most of them centered around what they'd just witnessed. Several cadets were already pulling up human combat doctrine files on their data pads, probably realizing they should have done that before now. Norix remained, their forms settling into something approximating stillness, which for a Gentari meant they were only flickering in and out of normal space occasionally instead of constantly. That was educational, they said, in the tone of someone who'd learned things they weren't entirely happy about knowing. "That's one word for it," Gina replied, rolling her shoulders and wincing at the stiffness already setting in. She'd taken more hits than she'd wanted to, and her arms were going to be spectacular shades of purple by tomorrow. "I must update our assessment files," Norix continued. "Human combat capability has been underestimated." "Yeah, we noticed," Gina said. "That's kind of why I'm here. Someone at Earth Command figured maybe it would help if other species understood what they were dealing with." "And do you believe this helped?" Nortrax gestured at Rothmal, who was arguing with the medical team about whether he needed a regeneration tank. "Or have you simply confirmed their fears?" Gina was quiet for a moment, watching the Kirathi commander. "Honestly, I don't know. But I'd rather they respect us and be cautious than underestimate us and be surprised. A pragmatic approach, Norix observed. Very human. We try. Rothmal finally convinced the medical team to let him walk, though they insisted on following him with equipment in case he collapsed. He limped over to where Gina stood, his movement stiff but determined. Up close, you could see the damage more clearly. Cracked armor plates, joints that weren't articulating properly. One compound eye partially swollen. "I owe you acknowledgement," he said, the words clearly costing him. "You fought with skill I did not anticipate." "You challenged someone without reading their file first," Gina replied, not unkindly. "That's on you, Commander." His mandibles clicked in what might have been embarrassment. "I assumed humans were as we had observed. Diplomatic, peaceful, preferring negotiation to conflict." "We are all of those things," Gina said. "We prefer negotiation. We're really good at diplomacy. We choose peace whenever possible." She met his compound eyes steadily. "But preference isn't the same as capability. We know how to negotiate because we know what happens when negotiation fails. We value peace because we remember what war costs." Rothmal shifted his weight, testing his damaged legs. "Your species fought wars among yourselves." "Constantly," Gina confirmed. "Big ones, small ones, wars over resources and ideology and territory, and things so stupid I'm embarrassed to list them. We got really good at killing each other. Then we finally got smart enough to mostly stop." "Mostly?" Norix interjected, their harmonics taking on an inquisitive tone. "We still have conflicts," Gina admitted, "but we've gotten better at resolving them before they become genocidal. Helps that we found a whole galaxy of other species to befriend instead of fight." "And if those species become enemies?" Rothmal asked. "If diplomacy fails?" Gina's expression went carefully neutral. "Then we apply everything our history taught us about ending threats. But that's the absolute last option, Commander. We've seen where that road leads. We've walked it so many times we've worn grooves in the path. We don't want to walk it again." "A comforting philosophy," Rothmal said, delivered by someone who just systematically dismantled me in front of 300 witnesses. "Yeah, well," Gina shrugged. "Actions speak louder than words, right? You wanted to see what Earth taught me. I showed you. The violence, the efficiency, the ruthlessness." She paused. "But here's the thing, Commander. That's not the most important lesson." Rothmal's mandibles spread in confusion. "You demonstrated human combat superiority. What lesson could be more important?" "That I stopped," Gina said simply. "Earth taught me how to kill efficiently, sure, but it also taught me that the strongest warrior isn't the one who can destroy an opponent. It's the one who can defeat them and chooses mercy anyway." The Chirathi commander stared at her for a long moment. "You believe this?" "I have to," Gina replied. "Because if the lesson was just, be better at violence than everyone else, then humanity would have destroyed itself centuries ago. We almost did, multiple times. The only reason we're still around is because enough of us figured out that winning isn't about being the last one standing in the ashes. It's about building something worth protecting." Norix's form flickered through several colors, processing. "This is why humans insist on serving in diplomatic and peacekeeping roles despite your military capabilities?" "Part of it," Gina agreed. "We know what we're capable of. That knowledge comes with responsibility. We don't get to pretend we're harmless, but we also don't get to use our capability as an excuse to be aggressive." She looked at Rothmal. "That's why I held back." Not because I was toying with you, but because showing you what I could do was enough. I didn't need to actually do it. Rothmal's posture shifted, something like understanding beginning to penetrate the layers of wounded pride. You fight to teach, not to defeat. I fight when I have to, Gina corrected. I teach so maybe fewer people have to fight in the first place. The medical team made insistent noises about needing to get Rothmal to the regeneration facility before his joints seized completely. He waved them off with one functioning arm, his attention still on Gina. I judged your species incorrectly, he said. This was ignorant of me. Yeah, it was, Gina agreed bluntly. But you're not the first, and you won't be the last. Most species look at us and see what we show them. The diplomats, the negotiators, the ones who'd rather talk than shoot. They don't see the context, the history, the reasons we're so committed to peaceful solutions. Because you know the alternative, Rothmal finished. Because we've lived the alternative, Gina said, multiple times, with better weapons each iteration. We figured out that if we kept going down that road, eventually we'd build something we couldn't survive. So we made a choice. To be peaceful, Norik said. To try, Gina corrected. Every single day, to try. Doesn't mean we're perfect at it. Doesn't mean we don't still have the capacity for violence. Just means we're committed to choosing differently when we can. Rothmal was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised everyone, including himself. Would you be willing to train me? Properly, I mean. Not ritual combat, not demonstration, your actual methods. Gina raised an eyebrow. You want to learn human combat doctrine, after I just used it to fold you into creative shapes? Because you used it to fold me into creative shapes, Rothmal replied. My species values strength, and you have shown me a kind of strength I did not know existed. I would learn it. It's not easy, Gina warned. Human training methods are intense. We push until failure, then push past that. We don't believe in comfortable learning. I have noticed, Rothmal said dryly, gesturing at his damaged armor. Gina considered for a moment, then nodded. Okay, but you need to heal first, and you need to understand something. Learning human combat techniques means learning human philosophy. The violence and the restraint, the capability and the responsibility. You don't get one without the other. Acceptable, Rothmal said immediately. Also, Gina continued, you're going to lose. A lot. Human training involves failing repeatedly until you learn not to. Your pride is going to take more hits than your armor did today. Rothmal's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. My pride has already been shattered before 300 witnesses. What is a little more damage among students? That's the spirit, Gina said, and there was warmth in her voice now, genuine respect. Okay, Commander, once medical clears you, we'll start. Fair warning, the first month is mostly learning how to fall without breaking things. I have already learned this lesson today, Rothmal replied. The medical team finally insisted on taking him away, practically carrying him despite his protests. As he left, several other alien cadets approached Gina, their expressions ranging from awe to nervousness to genuine curiosity. A Tellarian cadet, one of the ones who'd been in her original class, stepped forward. Instructor Gina, many of us would like to... That is, we were wondering if your human combat courses have openings. Gina looked at the growing group, at least 30 cadets from a dozen species, all watching her with newfound respect and healthy wariness. She thought about the paperwork this would generate, the curriculum updates, the inevitable complaints from instructors whose classes would lose students. Then she thought about Rothmal's question. What happens when diplomacy fails? Yeah, she said finally. We've got openings. But same rules apply to all of you. You're not just learning techniques. You're learning why humans fight the way we do, and more importantly, why we try not to. Show up ready to work, ready to fail, and ready to learn. Anyone not serious about all three can leave now. Nobody left. Gina smiled, the expression equal parts anticipation and resignation. Okay then, first class is Monday. Bring padding, because you're all going to spend a lot of time on the mat. As the cadets dispersed, chattering excitedly among themselves, Norix approached Gina one last time. You realize what you have done today? Made more work for myself, Gina replied. Changed the Academy's understanding of human capability, Norix corrected. This will have ramifications beyond simple combat training. Good, Gina said. Maybe next time someone thinks about challenging a human, they'll do their research first. And maybe, if we're lucky, understanding what we're capable of will make everyone think twice before conflicts escalate. Or it will make them fear you, Norix pointed out. Gina shrugged. Respect, fear, healthy caution. I'll take any of those over being underestimated. At least this way, people know what they're dealing with. She walked off the training mat, already composing the message she'd need to send back to Earth Command. They'd want a full report, probably within the hour, and she needed to phrase it carefully. Something about successful demonstration of human combat doctrine, increased interest in training programs, diplomatic objectives achieved through martial display. The boring version of, I beat up a Chirathi commander in front of half the academy, and now everyone wants to know what else humans are hiding. Earth Command would love that, or hate it. Possibly both. In the observation deck above, overlooked by everyone, an intelligence officer from a species humanity hadn't formally met, yet watched the recording of the fight for the third time. They made notes in a language nobody else could read, focusing particularly on the moments where Gina had been struck, and simply kept moving, where she'd taken damage that should have ended the fight and treated it as inconvenient at worst. The officer's species had been considering whether humanity represented a potential threat or potential ally. After watching this, they were reconsidering the entire framework of the question. Perhaps the real question wasn't what humans were capable of in combat. Perhaps it was what kind of species develops that capability and then actively tries to avoid using it. That kind of self-control, the officer thought, was either the mark of wisdom or the mark of something even more dangerous: patience. They made a final note, marked the file for high-priority review, and disappeared from the observation deck as quietly as they'd arrived. Back in the training ring, Gina grabbed her water bottle and took a long drink, thinking about everything that had just happened. Her body was starting to register complaints about the punishment it had taken, and she was definitely going to need a regeneration session herself before tomorrow. But mostly, she felt satisfied. The lesson had been delivered. The point had been made. Humanity wasn't going to be dismissed or underestimated anymore, at least not at the Academy. Whether that was ultimately good or bad remained to be seen. But it was honest, and after everything humanity had been through, everything they'd learned the hard way, honesty felt like the right foundation to build on. Even if that honesty included showing everyone exactly how good humans were at breaking things. She walked toward the exit, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed her, already planning her curriculum for 30 new students who had no idea what they'd just signed up for. It was going to be a long semester. But then again, humans were good at endurance. They'd proven that today.